So if God is actually vital to us, if he is the greatest thing in our lives, the next question that we begin to ask and begin to wonder is, what is God like to us? Like, what is God's character? And the way that we end up figuring that out is through God's inspired word. Through his Bible, we begin to figure out who he is. And what we see throughout the Bible is that it's split up into two different parts. The first part is in the Old Testament, in which we see God reveal himself to three different types of people: the prophets, the priests, and the kings. And God really begins to only show himself in kind of mysterious, different ways, through different circumstances, through different situations, in which he only pops up here and there to be able to deliver some sort of message to his people. But then everything changes. Everything begins to become different when he sends his son, Jesus, in the New Testament. And what we begin to see is that God is now personified. He is now a person living amongst other people, and he is with his disciples. And we begin to see more and more what he is like. And in the New Testament, we begin to see the character of God. And there's a very specific story in the book of John, actually John chapter 14, in which Jesus is with his disciples and he's hanging out with them, and he begins to wash their feet. They're confused and they're weirded out, not only because someone was washing their feet, but because the God of the universe, or the proclaimed God of the universe at the time, was washing their feet. In John chapter 14, one of Jesus' followers says this. He says, Philip says to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us." And Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'?" Now, what Jesus is trying to tell us, what Jesus is proclaiming to his disciples and to us today, is that if you look at Jesus, you see God. Or the other idea, the main idea that we have, is that if you want to know God, get to know Jesus. If you want to know God, get to know Jesus. So this is what this means. The more and more that we begin to see God in different circumstances, the more and more that we begin to see Jesus throughout the Bible, we begin to see God. So if we want to see what God thinks about other people, about loving them and caring for them, look at the way that Jesus cared for other people. If we want to see the way that God thinks about sin, look at how Jesus views sin, how he gives grace to those around him, how he cares for the sinner. If we want to know how God thinks about dead religion, look at the way that Jesus interacts with the religious elite of his day. If we want to know God, look at Jesus. And I just want to encourage you with two different things. Number one, if you are struggling and you're like, hey man, I struggle to know who God is because I have kind of these tensions within my soul. I feel like God has left me. I feel like I'm completely alone. Be encouraged, because we have the disciples to look at, in which they didn't even understand who God was, even though Jesus was with them physically every single day. So be encouraged. This can be a struggle. It's going to take a lifetime for you to be able to get to know who the Lord is and to wrestle and struggle with him. But in the same way, the second thing is, we don't have any excuse. Like, God has given us his word, he has given us his son to be able to get to know him, and he has given us his spirit to be able to guide us in our relationship with him. So we need to be diving into his word. We need to be getting to know who God is by studying Jesus. And so there's three different things. Three things I want us to do to be able to grow on our relationship with the Lord and to figure out what God is like. And I think number one, we need to begin to think about Jesus. Like, we need to begin to think about Jesus more. Intellectually, we need to begin to think about him. And I think throughout our days, we need to begin to think about him. The second thing that we need to begin to do is that we need to move. Like, we need to, as we are studying the things that Jesus has done, as we look at the way that he interacted with people, we need to begin to follow in that example and do the same things he did. We need to care for people in the same way he did. We need to obey the Lord in the same way that he did. We need to move and enact our faith. And the last thing that we need to do is that we need to experience. Like, we need to sit. We need to be with him. We need to pray. We need to get to know this God, because we have been given this ability to see who God is through Jesus. So Far Hill students, this week, I want you to begin to look at who God is by studying and looking at Jesus himself.